You are live. Yep.
I know Alex is going to argue with you. Mark Ridley.
I'm also a Tucson. Yeah, thank you, Aaron. You played your part perfectly. You aren't actually the center of our screen, so.
As is our custom. And it's awesome. It's so. What else? What's going on in your world? Yeah, well, we started with teachers and then all the leaders.
Review of how fundraising is regulated, and we've been trying to think about what is the role of trustees as well in terms of going forward. And one of the things that I've thought about, that I've lent upon my Creating the Future background with, is you can put as much regulation in place as you want to, you can put as many controls in place as you want to, but ultimately it all comes down to values and people and organisations having values sets. So I think going forward, thinking about trustees, we're going to try and lean on the conversations that we've had and think about how you play values into this so that it's not just about regulation.
Wow, that's huge. What you guys are going through is so tumultuous and so potentially life-changing, and the thought that you can actually infuse a set of values into that rather than just rules is pretty awesome.
We've had a really difficult time in the UK for quite a bit of time. It's not just been about fundraising, it's about, there's been another charity called Kids Company that has gone through an awful lot of money, and what a lot of these things seem to keep coming back to is that governance isn't working. So I think it's all sort of power to our arm in terms of thinking about what new governance models look like. Just one other awesome, I saw Angie Eikenberry present at a conference when she came over to the UK, and she was absolutely brilliant.
She is brilliant.
That was awesome. I miss you, Carl. I miss being in the UK too. Oh.
Well, and seeing you, Carl, was one of my absolute awesomes over the past several months. That's been over a decade in the making, and that one short hour that we had together was, yeah. What else is going on with you guys?
I can share awesomes which both involve a plane. Tomorrow I'm flying up almost into the Arctic Circle for a conference called the Aura Sustainability Summit. So a summit all about how we can make social change sustainable and not just sort of temporary or just feel good about it. And then my personal awesome is that after almost 3 years in Sweden, I'm moving back to San Francisco, and at the end of the year, I'm very excited to go back to the States. It's perfect timing, I think.
That is awesome.
Okay, why does Sweden have the coolest conventions and things that you get to go to all the time, Alex?
Well, you also don't realize that it's only late for about 7 hours right now. So we need other things to keep people excited and happy here. So in spite of the darkness, there's really cool things to do, but you have to do them all inside.
There's a lot of really, really, really cool stuff going on, innovative stuff going on across Europe. I hate to say they are leading the world. Not I hate to say. What I hate to say is that the rest of us are dragging our asses along to try and even begin where Europe is headed. But Europe is overall leading the charge on innovation in social change. It's just really exciting to see. Who else? Sydney, Gail, what's going on in your worlds?
Well, my awesome is I'm looking at the tree, the leaves fall out of my window. And the fall time of year is always my favorite time of the year. It seems to align with my own work and the changing of the evolution of my work. So looking for some leaves on the ground looking beautiful, and then looking forward to the spring professionally.
I have an awesome.
Yes.
My awesome is, I think this is working.
Yeah, and if folks could tweet and tell us if you could hear us. And
I've been following some tweets. There were some sound problems initially. In the last couple I saw where people were Stacy was able to hear us, and some other folks are able to hear us. So this is a total kludge, and this is something that Google said is not possible. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it will work, but it's basically blending two platforms together in order to get to
more
exceed,
than 10 people.
To exceed, to have 10 and the potential to have up to 50 up on the screen at the same time.
We're not going to have 50.
We're not going to have 50. But in any event, my awesomes are tech related, this being one of them, and also being part of all of the classes. As the tech person, I'm sort of in the background of all the classes, but listening to everyone and just absorbing what's been happening in the beta classes has been just amazing, totally amazing. So that's my awesome.
And
Yeah.
a huge shout out to Dimitri for making this happen too. This is a lot of work to get all these busy people across 5+ time zones to get us all in one place at the same time. So kudos to you, Dimitri.
The work of both the scheduling, Alex, and the fact that you guys had mentioned at the end of our last board meeting the possibility of having all our former board members with us, which meant that including the silent Creating the Future logo screen over there that you see that allows us to sort of kludge this all together, there were going to be 11 of us. And just the work that Dimitri has done in the past 48 hours to, because Google Live on air cannot do over 10. My guess is it can, but Google doesn't let you do over 10. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Milan.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Gail, what's going on with you?
So, hi, everybody. I would love to know who is observing or hopefully participating via Twitter, and you'll give us that list. That'd be great. So for me, since the last time I saw all of you, I think this is fairly true. Yeah. Everything has really changed as a result of actually living within this framework and applying it to my personal life as well as my professional life. I think the last time we were together, I was just about to move and did. We sold our house. We have done a lot of really interesting pieces of work in terms of moving our life from here to somewhere else, somewhere far, far away. And all of that is evolving and unfolding as, kind of we've been dreaming of doing. So that piece of the work that I talked about before is directly related to a constant examination and asking questions about, what do we really want and what would it take to make that happen, et cetera. So we feel like we're living this framework every day, as I'm sure many of you do as well. The other piece of it, though, of my Creating the Future Awesome has been the opportunity to participate in the development of the curriculum and the teaching or the facilitating of the Beta 101 class, which has been just a fascinating learning experience with a group of really amazing people. And I know that that's the case for all 5 of the groups, the cohorts, but I'm particularly in love with the group that I'm working with and co-facilitating with Hildy, and really thrilled to have this opportunity and also to be seeing it now. I've been sharing and teaching and facilitating in this way since 2010, I guess, in my own community, well, probably before that, but really seeing now how this catalytic thinking framework applies itself when a whole board asks if they can learn this thing and get more proficient at understanding it and understand themselves. So I've been living it in so many different ways that it's really changed everything and opened my eyes and my family, my partner's eyes particularly.
So, Gail, you were asking about who is watching. We've had notes from Kent Shell, Rebecca Hurd, Doug Knight, Stacey Ashton, and Annette Sandberg have all indicated they're here. So hello to all of you folks. Thank you for being here, and whoever else is here. So please
Absolutely.
let us know.
Let us know if you're watching. Just tweet to the hashtag CTFuture. And let us know, say hello, and share what's awesome in your life, because we want to know that too. So it's been awesome. Aside from woohoo, we got the tech working. What's been awesome in your life?
Well, I heard in the other room you talking about the huge transition of moving into a virtual world. So this is sort of a great symbol of that. Getting all the
we
virtual.
haven't talked about it.
Oh, we haven't. Okay, well. We, in this very crazy month with many things going on, amongst the other things going on is we decided to move out of our physical office and to not have a physical office anymore. All of our work is virtual. It was a really interesting time, for me it was, because we've been in that physical space for 22 years. And we had, diaper banks that started in there. And, we've been like 3 companies ago. And Erin can tell you because she worked in there for years. So that was a really, it was an awesome experience and a bit of a melancholy experience to say goodbye to a lot of things. I didn't tell you, I took the keys back yesterday. And that was the first moment where I kind of felt sad. It's like, oh, here's the keys. It's no longer ours, because as long as you have the keys, you figure, well, I can still get in. I can walk around this totally empty office, whatever.
Sit on the floor and cry.
whatever that would do. But yesterday was handing the keys back. So that's been a big awesome. This last couple of weeks actually is doing that. And then the symbol of that is we are totally 100% virtual. What better way to show it than in this? So,
yeah. And the disarray that you guys see behind us is that we now need to take everything out of what was the sort of small home office / art studio, take everything out and make this into an office. You do not want to see what the living room looks like right now. It is sort of floor to ceiling boxes, and we're hoping and praying that we remember where we put the X that we were working on last week, that we can make sure that we get at. Yeah, exactly. But that is pretty awesome.
And just a comment to Alex that part of this transition into the virtual world is that there's so much out there that accommodates that now. That there's co-working spaces, even the library it encourages you to come in and work there. It may be for 2-hour blocks, but you've got amazing bandwidth, and you've got beautiful spaces, and you've got whatever, at least 2-hour blocks in our libraries. And so we can work here, but we can also go somewhere else, which is what the office allowed us to do in these last couple of years, is to go somewhere else to do the work. So it is a very different world that accommodates that. And a big part of it is the fact that we can communicate with people in ways that were never possible.
Yeah. And I think the other part of that is the definition of virtual, which is that it's not just online, but in communities.
Right.
So it's, the final piece was the decision that we were using the office for our classroom space. And so people were coming, as they did in March, coming from all over the world to Tucson, Arizona, to sit in that space and learn together. And the decision that if there are immersive experiences, they're going to be in communities where people already are. And there will primarily be doing things online, as we've been exploring with the beta this past month or so. So it really changes and it redefines virtual, as in it's not centered in an organization, which so leads into what our conversation is going to be today, but is about being in community. Which is really powerful.
I think rather than being nowhere, you're actually everywhere.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think actually virtual is the wrong word, because virtual means manufactured, and this is very real and connected and grounded. Just happens to be that we're doing it across continents through technology, but there is nothing virtual about this. This is very real.
Thank you for that, both Alex and Justin. And by the way, Justin, I know you also watch Twitter, so if you'd like to be keeping an eye on it as well, that would be fabulous.
I know Alex does as well. So as you guys are, anything you find.
We'll be watching it, but...
So Rebecca has shared that her awesome is that this conversation is going on and what it will make possible for many ripples beyond. Karen Smith is here. Hello, Karen. She said she doesn't ever recall such excitement for a board meeting, that there are big things ahead. Kent has shared that he's excited to be here today. And Doug has sent kudos to you. You're good, my man. Just very Doug. Thank you, Doug. Stacy has called you the technical wizard. So really, truly, we have a Twitter feed just so you can feel great.
Isn't that what Twitter is?
We've called this meeting for Dimitri. Meeting now adjourned. This is wonderful. Wonderful to see you guys here. My awesome, there's a million awesome. I could not be more excited about this meeting. I've spoken with many of you. I've been tweeting a lot and writing a lot and having a lot of conversations via podcast about this truly is for an organization, systems geek. This is heaven. To be able to not just talk about this for creating the future, but to really look at what is possible when we stop thinking that everything has to be the way it's always been. And it just blows the doors open. And so part of what's awesome for me is that this conversation that we're beginning, I'm like giddy with excitement about this. Also, really awesome in the past month has been that Gail mentioned that she is co-teaching one session for our the rollout of our new curriculum online. I am co-teaching all 5 of them. And so this has been a bit overwhelming. Each cohort has at minimum 4 and otherwise 5 sessions. Each session is 3 hours. This is happening over about a 6 to 8 week period. And part of the excitement, there's a million things that are exciting. Part of the excitement is that so many people were interested in helping us beta test this first class that we had to do 5 classes. What we thought were going to be 2 betas of the 101 level of our curriculum wound up being 5 cohorts. just because there was so much interest. That's awesome. That's like really, really, really awesome. And just what we're learning so much, the excitement about taking what we have done in immersion and over 5 years of teaching this, the content. You guys have watched the language at Creating the Future change and are really getting a deeper and deeper handle on what this tiger is that we've got by the tail. Infusing that into 5 days of immersion, as Susan Detweiler called it, is drinking from a fire hose. And it is deep, and it's fast, and it is re-entry out of coming together in a different place and going back into your community and back into your home. The ability to tease out all of the various practices of catalytic thinking, to go slowly, to have the opportunity to practice, for people to be able to immediately leave a class after one session and go home and practice, not even go home, flip off their computer, go into the living room and practice with a conversation with their spouse, practice a meeting the next day. It really has completely redefined what it is we're teaching, how we're teaching it, how people can so quickly grasp, because this is not a theoretical construct, this is a practice and a set of practices, and how quickly we can take these practices into our lives and with one question change everything that goes on in a room. And I'm getting to watch that with 22, actually, if you count the co-instructors, 25, 26 of us who are deeply practicing and exploring what this really means and what this makes possible. This is everything I'm working on these days, between this and our building our structure, are truly among the most exciting things I've ever done in my life. So, I truly feel like breaking into the Lego movie, that, everything is awesome. Everything just really is awesome.
Is there anything that, any element of the face-to-face immersion that you feel you have not at this point figured out how to apply digitally?
It's funny, Sydney, last night one of the cohorts got together and it was their second to last time together, and they were anticipating next week being their last time together. And they almost started crying. They have met online for 3 hours at a time. Last night was the 4th time. Online, just like we're doing here, looking like the Brady Bunch. And the biggest thing that we were sort of holding our breath and diving into the deep end was the question of, can you form community online? Can people care about each other? And Sydney, you even mentioned in after the very, very first of your classes that you already felt like you knew people. You already were building connections with people. Angie, it's definitely been going on in your class from the very, very first time. That was my biggest piece, was can that feeling of connectedness, that building of community, transcend through the screen. And I think that's probably, I think the other piece on the flip side of that is you may not have the ability to, if somebody is struggling, immediately take them into another room and sit down and coach. I think that's probably a piece. But the fun part about the questions is that it's not about this isn't working, but what would work? What would it take for someone who is struggling for whatever reason to have that conversation, for us to be attentive and to have that conversation?
We were talking last night about it, and one of the things that I've seen in this, in just being, in some ways the fly on the wall, because I, as the tech person, I'm in the meetings but not actually participating, so I watch and listen to everything that's going on, is the feedback loop. That when you're in immersion, you go from class, day to day to day to day, but this, you've got week, or you've got a period of time, so there's an opportunity, as somebody says, to try this, but you're also getting immediate feedback. So you're on Facebook, you're on the group that pertains to it, so that there is a a way of growing in what you're doing that is supportive and encouraging in a much more, I would say, gentle, much more relaxed way than it would be in the fire hose approach of the 5-day immersion.
Yeah. Yeah, Gail, do you have anything to add to Sydney's question about things that we would still want to be that are powerful in immersion? The relationship piece was the big one for me, but is there anything else that was powerful in immersion that we're still trying to figure out in online?
Oh, I'd say tons, actually. Every day we learn something new that we didn't realize, or we thought, oh my gosh, we hadn't noticed that connection before. I suspect that every time we develop, because there's going to be 5 courses or 5 sessions or whatever to it, I have the feeling that we've only just begun to imagine what this thing is going to make possible coming out of immersion.
Yeah, and I guess the big piece of it, Sydney, in answer to your question, is we were very mindful in crafting this to not ask how can we turn immersion into an online course. The question was, we have catalytic thinking. If we had never taught this before, how would we teach it? And that was a very, very different approach than
right.
How do we turn these 5 days? And that made a big difference.
Well, I think that's a great approach, because not just to belabor this, but I think you're giving it an opportunity to really be more on its own. I was just wondering, is there any piece of it that you, because I didn't experience the face-to-face, but if it was anything like the, catalytic thinking, then wow, so I was just wondering, how could it have, is there any element of it that you haven't figured out how to pull in yet at this point?
Yeah, the relationship piece, and then the only other piece was actually solved last night, which is beer.
I was going to say group meals.
Yeah, and because this was a meeting that's not, Auntie's is a little bit more early in the morning, might not work as well. Yeah, last night there was definitely wine involved, and not me, but.
Just one last thing to say, and then I know we got to talk about other things, but one last thing to say is that the gift that the participants are offering to us in terms of what we're learning, when we started, we had the paradigm of the 5-day immersion process in our heads, and we have exploded so many pieces of that in our experience as a result of our experience with the folks that are now just looking at a tiny portion of it and realizing, my God, it's an entire universe unto itself. Every kind of half hour of the 5-day immersion has the potential to be a whole course unto itself. So, it's such a gift to be learning that and imagining with them and because of them what it might make possible in the future. So it's everything about creating the future has changed because we are doing this. And that's what is so truly invigorating.
Yeah, it really is. Rebecca tweeted, "Trust the process, trust the room, online or in person, it works." So, yeah, wonderful. I have got some notes in the other room that I wanted to be attentive to as we dive into the meat of this meeting. So I'm going to run and go get them. Talk amongst yourself.
So, Cindy, on our screen, you're in the center, so you need to do the Brady Bunch thing where you look to the left and the right and up and down. I'm doing it. So, one of the other things that's been really amazing about the learnings that have been going on is that there's 5 different cohorts. So you have the opportunity to learn not from one group of people and think, well, this is the way it's going to be. No, here are the things that are similar between them, and here are the things that are different. What's a morning class? What's a Saturday class? How does that impact the learning and the people that are involved? So that's been another fascinating and I think really information gathering component of the fact that we're doing these as betas and that we have that many betas that are for Class 101.
Right. Okay.
All righty. So I want to thank you guys for this journey that we've been on and are about to embark upon. And I want to thank the folks who are watching on Twitter, the folks who couldn't, watching on Twitter, watching on the video and tweeting, because this is all about all of us. This is not about the board or an organization. This is about all of us. I thought it might be helpful to give you guys a bit of grounding, especially for folks who are watching and just coming into the conversation. So I'm going to start at the beginning and share, as Gail did so eloquently during your tenure as chair of the board, starting with our vision, which is that creating the future envisions a world where all beings are living well individually and collectively. And that we know this is possible because it's not impossible. And our work is to teach people how to bring out the best in people in any situation by the questions that they ask. And we do that by being a living laboratory with a 10-year mission. Our 10-year mission is that these ways of being with each other, these cultural ways of the questions we start meetings with and the questions we start our day with and the things that we ask each other that we don't even realize we're asking each other, that we shift and we start coming from a place that brings out the best in each other and that those become culturally embedded. And that's our mission, is that we see a tipping point within 10 years, which started about two years or so ago as we started to really push this stuff out. To accomplish that mission, creating the future is a living laboratory. That's a really important thing for us to know today, because this is a laboratory where our job is to experiment. The laboratory itself has 4 functions. There's obviously, as any laboratory, a research and development function. We want to know what's going on out in the world that works to bring out the best in people, and where we don't find it, develop it ourselves. To then share that information out with the world, we use education in a variety of forms, which you've just heard us talking about, just one of them. Demonstration, because people need to not only learn, but they need to see what's actually possible. Those of you who've been reading our journal recently know that Rebecca has been spearheading a stories initiative, so that we're sharing the stories of what works. That's all part of demonstration. And then convening different conversations, which this is definitely part of. But as a laboratory, it is our job to experiment. What we realized early on is that there's no one whose job is to mess around the edges, disrupt stuff, blow stuff up, and see what could work better. And so if it's nobody's job, what fun would it be to step into that space and explore what's possible? And we use catalytic thinking as the basis for exploring that. And catalytic thinking is a set of practices that make explicit the things that work to create amazing results and have over the time of humanity. It's not as if we invented the wheel. We did not invent the wheel. We know that the wheel has been invented for thousands of years, that there's things that work to bring out the best in us. And what we've just been doing over the past 15 years of our own R&D is to find what are those things that bring out the best in us that everybody knows, whether it's through faith traditions, whether it is through neuroscience and psychology, whether it's looking back over history. What is it that brings out the best in us? And we've brought that together into what we call catalytic thinking. And we call it catalytic thinking because the thinking part is it's about how we think before what we do, because what we do comes out of how we think. And we call it catalytic because it works real fast, and that's what you guys have been talking about. At the minute we change one question, it changes everything. And so that's really at the root of what we do in this laboratory. Our programs began in 2009, informally, as Dimitri and me saying, hey, we should probably teach this stuff that we've learned. and have developed and developed over time into what you guys just heard us talking about is one part of the depth of the programs that we now have. Our board started meeting in 2011. I wish Mark was on the screen here. Mark, Rafi, and Alexandra were our first board members. Gail joined us quickly in Sydney, and we've been together since 2011. And it is a pleasure to have everybody, current and past board members here, because you guys have all been part of this journey. The interesting thing about our board, from the beginning, we have wondered why we have a board. That question has been bubbling. Each of you has come in at different times in the tenure of this board and has heard that question asked in different ways. I remember in the early days, we used to joke that we weren't a board, we were a group of people trying desperately not to be a board. It comes in part, it's interesting when we ask the question, why are we here? One might think, and I especially want folks who are watching who are new to our board meeting, one might think that that question comes from ignorance of, well, we don't know what boards do. It comes from the exact opposite of that. It comes from a place of people who are so steeped in, we have the governance expertise in this room right here. I wish Mark Eckhart were here joining us because he's got that expertise in the corporate world as well. The governance expertise is probably centuries worth if you add up our time that we've all spent in governance and teaching it and exploring it. And so it comes from that deep place of having seen what routinely doesn't work and then filtering that through the creating the future thinking, framework, lens of, we're not going to focus on what doesn't work. We want to focus on what would work. We don't want to know, oh, boards just suck and it's so bad and blah, blah, blah. That everything we do comes from the lens of, okay, what would good look like and how do we create what's possible? And so that leads up to the present. Over the past year, one of the things that's happened over time is because this is about changing the questions globally that we all ask and making that cultural shift. All of us who participated in Creating the Future have mentioned at some point or another that this feels more like a movement than an organization. And we've been talking about that a lot over the past year. Some of you have seen the piece that I did at Stanford Social Innovation Review that compared organizations to movements and looked at what was different in what success is defined by. Is it success of a movement or success of an organization? Do we live to see another day, which is organization, or do we fight the good fight, make something awesome happen, and go home? That's what has led to this conversation. In every aspect, there's two things going on simultaneously here. One is that, and you get a sense of it from what we were talking about before with just the one education program. We're at a point where we're no longer in startup, we're at scale up. All of our programs are developing, scaling, taking off, starting to talk about new programs, and the first question is, how do those scale? We need a structure that's going to support that. We need a structure that's going to support that. The second piece is the board's realization over the past several months of meetings around the question of if movement leadership, and whether we are a movement ourselves or supporting the global movement to create a more humane world, if movement leadership is active, and that active leadership is around bringing people in to the movement and connecting with folks in the movement and connecting with other groups that are in the movement. If it is active leadership in making sure the values are adhered to, if it is active leadership in determining what programs and products and services and ways of being will disseminate that, if it is active leadership in all of those areas, and if that's already being done by the people who are on the ground doing the work, then the question that arose in our June board meeting is, what do we need a board for? Which was one of those moments. And I loved my conversation with you, Sydney, when you sort of capsulized it and said, that's the question we've been trying to ask for 4 years now.
That's what it felt like.
Truly, you know, what do we have a board because everybody has a board? If legally in Arizona, which is where we're incorporated, legally we have to have one board member. Many states in the U.S., 2 board members. I think that the most I've ever seen is you need 3. So if legally we're compliant with 1, if all of our work is deeply embedded with catalytic thinking, and every question we ask and everything we encounter is seen through the lens of catalytic thinking, which embeds our values. If connecting happens just the way this is happening right now, every one of our strategic meetings is happening live online, inviting people to come into the room. So that connection and fiduciary, it's no longer about we need a board to represent people, because people are representing themselves, they're showing up, leads to a whole different question. And so that's what brings us here, is trying to define what is the structure that will accomplish our mission. What is the structure from a leadership perspective? What is the structure from a management perspective? If we're going to use those 2 words, just because they're commonly understood or commonly misunderstood. From a day-to-day perspective, an operational perspective, from a leadership perspective, a decision-making perspective, a fiduciary perspective. What can a structure make possible? What would it take for that structure to accomplish that? And what would that look like? And what will lead us to success? So that's sort of the historical perspective. I'd like to open it up to you guys to see if there's anything you think I missed or is important. Either those of us who are on the screen here or anybody who is on Twitter. Carl, yes, I love your quote, the Einstein quote. We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created those problems.
Most appropriate for what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And Doug says community is collaboration, no matter where it lands, online, offline, in line, out of line, connecting. So I think that was regarding our education, but yeah, it's pretty cool. And he loves what's happening there. So is there anything you guys would add to my preamble here?
Yeah, could I begin? So everything that I've been told about organizations and structures, as you said, Hildy, is that it's all about planning for long term. So we've got to be able to sort of see around corners, and we've got to have certainty in as much as we can. So we set up structures to try and give us certainty, whether that's certainty about what we've done in terms of accountability, or whether that's sort of certainty about the future in terms of sort of having 3 and 5 year plans and all that sort of stuff. So that's sort of that's why you have your traditional board that's skills based. I mean, as hopefully people from a range of diverse backgrounds, we get masses of board papers that we may or may not read once a month, once a quarter, or whatever. And indeed, as sort of someone said to me at a governance conference a few days ago, she had to write a contract for the government, and it was 500 pages long. And she said, "You do realise that this is the last time anyone will ever read this document, don't you?" And that's what a lot of board papers are like at the point that they're being written. But everything that I'm hearing now about the world is about uncertainty, and it's about just how difficult it is to plan for the long term. So the characteristics that I think organizations need, or I'm told that organizations need more than anything now, are about flexibility and about adaptability. And that's not about structure, or it's about a very different kind of structure that's loose, that's flexible, And that probably sort of fits in with where social attitudes are, I think, at the minute, that people are much less brand loyal, that they are time poor, so that they want to sort of come in, they want to contribute to something, and then they probably want to move on and contribute to something else and do something different. So we need to have structures that recognize that that for this thing to scale, it's not going to scale off the back of what you might call a civic core. It's not going to scale up off the back of a small cohort of people who can give huge amounts of time. Instead, it's going to scale up based upon a much broader network of people who are much more dispersed, that have lots of other things to do, that can give very small amounts of time. And it's going to scale up and be successful because those people will be wearing different hats and that they'll be connected to different things. So we've got to try and find a way of running this organization that takes account of, I suppose, the way that people are now living their lives.
Beautiful. Yeah. And what's striking me, Carl, as you're saying that is that decentralized nature of it, with people giving small amounts of time in very deep ways and then figuring out how that fits into their life. That's what movements do.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much more movement-like than organization, or traditionally organization-like.
Do you remember a few years ago, Hildy, there was a computer package, a download called SETI, SETI, and it was about trying to discover whether or not there was life on other planets. And because back in the day computing power wasn't that great, what they instead did was they amalgamated and networked the latent capacity of millions of computers around the world. Well, that's what you've got to do, or we've got to do. We've got to be able to find a structure that utilizes, I think, what I heard someone call people's cognitive surplus. Those moments of time that's on a spare where they might just be able to do a little bit and spread it for us.
Beautiful.
You know, just as a quick aside, Carl, that same process was used in medical research on a project called Folding at Home for basically unfolding proteins. And they were using spare time on computers. So where SETI is, we're looking for life and we may find it. That was, we're actually creating something that we're going to use tomorrow in the laboratory. So it can be very, very practical. It doesn't need to be as ethereal as aliens.
So I think there is kind of the flip side, or the complement to what Carl was saying, in terms of the addition that someone makes to creating the future in that movement. It's funny. I guess I was watching Tuesday night's Daily Show. They had Gloria Steinem on there, and she said, the women's movement is not me. A movement is people. I should be able to step out and go away. And what stuck in my head, and what's happening with this conversation, and since Dimitri said medical stuff, is sort of the petri dish mode and the viral mode in a good way, which is what happens when we incubate an idea, when we have a place where ideas really do foster and grow, but then the viral effect happens, which is we put it out there and people are able to take it, and it mutates and it moves. And, you know, I think what Carl was saying, and at the heart of what creating the future is, you know, it's about people asking questions. Well, they don't happen, that doesn't happen in the construct of creating the future and something that is labeled or associated with creating the future. That happens in, I'm out in the world, and when I interact with the world, I'm just doing it in this way. And so there's something, I think, also in that element of what's the structure that seeds the ability of people to do that and to move freely out in the world with that, and go.
Could I just come back on that? First of all, the entrance fee, Justin Pollock is worth the entrance fee alone for these meetings. Secondly, Justin made a really important point there, which is the ideas that you have, they mutate. I think that's incredibly important, because one of the big problems that we see with organizations and governance these days is that they're obsessed with control, because the old way of doing things was command and control. And governance is part of that control framework. But if this is that laboratory, that petri dish, as Justin just described, that mutates, control is anathema, because you want to mutate into different ideas, and therefore you can't have a governance function that's controlling.
I love you guys.
We actually can't use the word governance, because to govern is to control.
Yeah, one of the things that you guys will notice in all of the writings and all of the conversations about this, the word governance never came, or when it comes up as the evil thing. That this is not about governance. It really is. Is there anything else in sort of a preamble way that you guys that you guys would add to where we've been and what it feels like?
One of the things that I feel at this stage is that approaching this shift and looking at it as a movement makes it big, not that it makes it bigger, but it doesn't feel like you have to hold on to something. And frequently when you have a governance and a control structure, in addition to managing things, you want to in addition to controlling things, you want to manage things. So the idea of open source is an anathema to that kind of process, because you don't give things away. You don't give ideas away. You don't, that is something that you hold close to yourself. And what we're really talking about here is something that is very open and shared to the world, which allows people, Carl, the example that you were giving, it allows someone to give whatever they are able and want to give or participate in a way that they can participate based on who they are, where they are, as opposed to the prescribed, you have to use this process, you have to use this thing, you have to use whatever. So there is a kind of a freeness and openness in terms of what this presents to your life, to the future, to the world.
But what you're making me think of is that if the only way that we all catch a cold is if we open the window and breathe on each other. And when Justin's talking about a virus spreading, a virus spreads by the windows being open or being on a busy bus or in a busy street or in an airplane, being with each other and spreading it. And that's the open thing. Yeah.
And the connection, it spreads by connecting to people. So let's just go on.
What's really interesting too is I think, in my opinion, the number one critique of every single movement that I could think of from those outside the movement is that it lacks, what they perceive as control, right? That it lacks, they want to look at it as an organization, but a movement is not an organization. Because the organization does have standards of control, and the reality is that the control that is being sought is the path toward finding a way back to comfort for them. But there's nothing, comfort and movements, like those two things don't. The whole reason why the movement is there is because it's too comfortable as it is. You get to the point where you assume that this is the way it has to be, and then something gets shaken up. So I think all of these words are very important as you think about this. Comfort, the relationship between comfort and control, the relationship between those that would try to characterize, or should I say, put a movement into the box of an organization so that comfort might come back.
So it seems like we then, even though we started the conversation by casting our eyes back to what, sort of the context of what we've been doing, in order for us to really thrive in this conversation, we almost have to ask ourselves to imagine that we are a group of people who are absolutely motivated and inspired by an idea or a practice or a thing, that we've come together to explore how to spread that thing, and we want to organize around it rather than thinking about what we are not, thinking about what we imagine it might take or might want to be. What does that thing look like? And so far, I've definitely heard that the idea of that sense of security is going to come from something other than control. And we've certainly had this conversation many, many times before as a group, and the archives will have lots of record of us talking about this very thing, the flexibility and accessibility and ability to sort of self-develop and spread virally and so forth. So I think it's really cool to imagine us as a group of people who are just meeting for the first time to say, wow, did you hear about this thing? Wow, what can we do about that? I'd love that. I'd love for us to be looking at things in that direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to share some of the tweets, because people are tweeting, which is fabulous, and we're just so happy that you guys are here. See how far back we're going here. Go back. Press the wrong button. Kent was talking about, just as Dimitri was, could there be useful insights on structure in open source systems? Rebecca's talking about what structures seed the ability to incubate and share ideas, sharing out Justin's thinking there. The impact and importance of values in structure, from Karen Smith. She's quoting Jeanette Winterston as saying, what you risk reveals what you value, which is beautiful. What you risk reveals what you value. Carl is simultaneously tweeting, and I don't know if I should read the tweets from Carl, or Carl can just say the tweets. Yes. Carl said that he hears from time to time the phrase tight and loose, and it feels like that might be relevant here. Absolutely. Absolutely. The fact that words mean things. Words mean things, that when we talk about governance, we're talking about control, and that's not what this movement's leadership is about. Doug is saying he loves the idea of be like water via Bruce Lee and Jeet Kune Do. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water. Yeah, which is really, really powerful. So there's more. This is great. I love it. Less gatekeeping, more open pastures. Thank you, Stacy. Less gatekeeping, more open pastures. or if there's going to be a gate, it needs to be really, really, really big. It's really wonderful. And Doug says he digs the idea of Imagineers like Disney. The main goal is to imagine. The immediate next goal is to design and move that goal into what's real. I think that these are really going to inform our conversation.
I wanted to go back to Gail's question.
Okay.
Speaking of imagining, and there was something that struck me. I'm not sure where this falls into the conversation, but the one thing about a board is the idea of creating accountability and responsibility with people who care, that we show up. Because I think both Carl and Cindy were talking about people wanting to do something, people caring about something, but also needing a structure that holds them to, hey, I'm showing up for something. And a board really does do that in a particular way. I also think it has been our tension as a board is we don't know exactly what to do and what it is that we were supposed to be supporting. Is it supporting, Hildy and Dimitri, is it supporting the organization infrastructure? And I think all of those things have been a part of that question. But Gail raised, and as you think about, if we sort of continue with this idea of the viral piece of spreading things and recognizing there are about this. And if our role is to support them in being able to put their piece in place, but recognizing that there are to help people do that. Like us coming together as a group that does something, even though what it is, gives us an avenue to step into that. And honestly, part of, I think, the frustration for some people, not necessarily people whose faces we're seeing right now, but I think universal about boards is when they feel like that's not what I'm getting out of this space. I am not getting my ability to do the thing that I do, the thing that demonstrates how I care and my talent in doing that. And so I think that for me, that's the big thing, is what is it that honors everyone who's stepping into the space so that they are, we talked way back when we talked about financial resources. What's the thing that ensures everybody who comes to this is walking away with something that supports themselves as well as the movement that's there? And that framing, I think, is what so much drives my thinking and where I'm feeling like whatever this is sort of needs to go. And I don't know whether that's a board or a movement or whatever, but that's the goal.
We'll figure it out. I would love to start with the question. I think that we've got the basics down, and we could go for days about what doesn't work. But I'd really like to start with the high potential question, which is about structure, whether it is structure of operations, structure of leadership. What can a structure make possible for furthering our mission of making ubiquitous these ways of being? What can a structure make possible, and for whom? And maybe we can start with the for whom's. What can a structure make possible, and for whom, for accomplishing our mission that everybody everywhere knows how to bring out the best in each other by the questions that they ask? So who are the for whom's?
As we rethink what the structure is, I mean, Justin, I was moved by your point about the structures, but I can't help but thinking that when you create a structure, there's people on the outside of the structure. So we think about, by making us the board, it's great that there's so many people on Twitter, but still, by definition of us being on the board and not being on the board, it's giving more value or weight to our voice. So I would think about a structure, in such a word, that is inclusive, such that there's no one excluded from having the structure.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me when you put the question the way you did, Hildy, it also then calls upon us for it being something that is simultaneously instructive, celebratory. We want people to learn this idea or this thing called how you bring out the best in others, and celebrate the fact that it's happening, acknowledging the fact that it continues to happen, that it grows, that it becomes viral. And I don't know, I'm not sure I have any thoughts about sustaining, simply that that the act and the art of acknowledging and celebrating and instructing, coaching, guiding, whatever words you want to use, are at the heart of it.
Who are the for whom's? If we were to say, whatever this thing becomes, however it is, and structure is the word that makes sense to me. If another word makes sense to you guys, let's play with that word. But whatever shape this effort takes to accomplish the mission, who is impacted by that? Who Who could potentially be impacted by that?
I can jump in. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Angie.
Well, I mean, everyone could be, I guess, is if you take it to its full extent. But it seems to me that having some kind of structure in place, whatever that is, can enable people to kind of come in and out, as we talked about earlier. Carl mentioned with this cognitive surplus. The only way to build on that is to have something in place. So anyone it could be anyone, but it's in particular, I guess, if you think about concentric circles, it would first be perhaps the people who are, I guess, most connected to creating the future already, and then the people that they're working with, and so on, extending out. But eventually, I think we want to create, if we're creating a movement, we want anybody to be able to plug in.
I would say my for whom would be those sitting around tables at places that are organizations who are on boards, existing boards, and really changing the conversation about how they move change forward, mission-based change forward. But at some point, it also, I think, just like it has been for us, it changed. The other for whom is individuals, right? Because the opportunity to even look at your individual life from the perspective of asking different questions and seeing what that might make possible in your life as well. So I think that it's what I found just, even over the last month, is that it's hard to apply it in the institution without also, let me chase that. When you start to apply it, it seems like it just happens to be the opportunities to apply it is both in the personal life as well as in the institutions. And so even though you may go into it thinking, well, I can't wait to use this at the next community meeting, you find yourself doing it also in your own household, right? So it's once it's there, it's the for whom is the individual, the for whom is those in the community meeting or any group where there's a need for conversation to rise to the level of what does our work make possible as well.
Mm-hmm. There was a comment by Karen Smith, and it's the end of her comment that I think is really interesting. It's shared space, virtual space for anyone to enter it with intent or curiosity. And I think it's the curiosity component, because the intent component is all the people we're talking about, the people around the table, the concentric circles and whatnot. But the curiosity is the individuals. They could be part of that, but it's just someone who's just curious about, is there something here? Is there something going on? So having the welcome mat out for those folks is I think, an important part of what this evolves into.
Yeah, and I think that gets to the ripples that Angie was talking about. Mm-hmm. That because the eventual ripples are what Sydney's talking about,
right,
which is the people who don't even know they're in a ripple. That stuff has happened. We posted a while ago on Facebook a graphic of concentric circles meeting other concentric circles, and with a little note at the end of one of them that says the mission will be accomplished when people we don't know and have never heard of and have never heard of us are being this way with other people we don't know who have never heard of us. And I think that's the eventuality of the ripple. So there's the people who are intent, involved, curious, have never heard of any of it, and it doesn't matter. So if in fact at all of those stages of the ripples, and I really love your grounding this, Carl, in individuals coming and going by their interest and intent, and Dimitri's kicking something. Oh, your foot's caught in the cord, no wonder. I'm sorry, we're having technical difficulties. If really what we're talking about is that the people impacted by whatever we do will be whoever is stepping in, is finding an on-ramp at any particular time. And the question being then, what are they finding an on-ramp to? What can the way we are organized and the way we are being and the shape of this thing, what can it make possible for them?
So I think I want to go backwards a step before that question, Hildy, which is, I mean, I know we have a tendency, we want to be inclusive and we sort of say this makes sense for everyone, and it does make sense for everyone. But I think there is an element of really it is actors, and whomever that can be, who are exploring, to me, the idea of self-efficacy, which is I can actually affect change in the way that I want it to happen. And I think, to Sydney's point, that manifests individually. I think, Gail, you have a wonderful example of how that can just be your life. And then, that actually ripples out to organizations, which is, particularly we talk about community benefit organizations. It's the efficacy of the organization to actually be able to have intentionality around reaching out to a goal that they want to see. The only danger in that is that the outcome, and I mean, this is the power of the idea, the outcome can be used for good or bad. You could be, you can as equally create conditions for awful things as you can for wonderful things. And in fact, that's the accidental structure of many of our systems, is they're following the same model. It's just they're not either being intentional about it, or the goal is something different than what we want. So I think there's something in that it's reaching out to people who truly feel like they want to be actors in that space of efficacy. And I think we do have a value of bringing out the best in people and a richer, thriving community. And so we hold that. And then I see it that you connect that desire in people to a variety of avenues to where that's happening for folks. That's what a movement is to say, the world doesn't change because one person had a great idea. The world changes because a bunch of people decided, I want life to be different. And enough people said, yeah. And how do you do that? Well, I do it this way. How could we do it? And that's where it builds up. So I think the boom has to have that predisposition. Right. And then the structure has to give them, I think in our day and age, a whole lot of ways to get to ideas that support the thinking. So I don't know if that was helpful. And
well, what it does, Justin, what it does is it helps to clarify. Let's talk about the various ripples in those concentric circles one at a time. So let's look at what can a structure, a shape, make possible for the people who are in that center, the stone at the center of all those ripples, the people who are actively leading and creating and teaching and doing right now. People who are teaching, people who are taking on programs, people who are actively stepping in and saying, as several individuals are and more are, I want creating the future's work to be my life. And I don't know what that means, but I want it, and I want to explore what that means. And here's my gifts, and here's where my proclivities are, and I want this to be my life. And that is how we've been, rather than going out and saying, we're looking for people who are doing X, and what are your skills? We've been inviting the conversation. If you want this to be more part of your life, come on down. So there's that first, the stone, if you want to say, in the pond with the ripples. Surrounding that, and so I think those would be your actors. Those are your absolute, very active actors, Justin. Surrounding that are another layer of actors, which are our fellows the people who are taking classes with us right now, people who are volunteering in various ways. So there's people who are not fellows, but for instance are facilitating the Facebook group for consultants. So the people who are absolutely acting, but are not at that, they're not the stone that are creating the ripples. So our fellows, our volunteers, maybe outside of that, and those folks are relatively involved. Many of them are in this conversation right now on Twitter. And maybe outside of that are people who are supporting us in a variety of ways, whether that is donors, whether that is people who take on a one-off task. Just as you indicated, Carl, I've got some time now. I'm happy to do this because I love what you guys do, but are not deeply engaged, but are supporting and are. So I'm just thinking about maybe we think about those ripples.
So I'm thinking then the structure that we're providing are actually stones. So what the structure does is it gives more people more stones to throw to create more ripples. If we think about like an analogous movement, I keep thinking back to Ashoka, because oftentimes when we look at movements, we're thinking about like around a very specific topic, but Ashoka is very broad. So they started off with selecting the very best social entrepreneurs, making them Ashoka fellows. I've always been critical of this because I think it idolizes the individual too much and doesn't recognize the entire movement. But thankfully, they've moved towards now their catchphrase or their mission is everyone a change maker. So all they've provided really is this term change maker, which I think is brilliant because in and of itself, it's something that people are opting into and it's not defined. It doesn't say you have to be an entrepreneur. It doesn't say you have to start your own thing, but it says that you are making change in some way. And I think in doing that, what they've done well is that they're creating these different on-ramps where people can join in. Maybe it's through a changemaker school or through a university program. But the bottom line is that they've sort of created this, it's a platform, maybe it's just a vocabulary, but by opting into being a changemaker, you're basically enabling people to have more stones that they can then throw so they can create changemakers in whatever community or context they know best.
So they're values stone, because they're really based on the values that Ashoka is promoting, supporting, living. So when you throw the stone out there, you really are throwing a set of values out there that people can be part of or support or do whatever.
One thing I want to just acknowledge, I know that Sydney's going to need to take a break in a little while, and I'm going to say that maybe when Sydney takes a break, we can all take 5 minutes and stretch, and it's early in the morning here, coffee. And I know that Erin needs to leave and go prepare for the Math Fest event that you've got cooking, which is so fun. So I just want to acknowledge Erin, if you sneak off in the middle of the conversation, that we're just so grateful that you're here. And I want to hear what you're thinking before you go.
Yes, and Justin totally just called me out. He's like, don't forget to share before you leave. So thank you, Justin, for that. Yeah, I'm just, I have not been able to be part of the catalytic thinking framework yet, and all of this stuff just makes me much more eager to do so. But I'm so incredibly excited about the conversations that you all seem to be having, and especially the one that's happening today, and about what the future of creating the future is going to be as a result of it. And I'm loving the stories that we're hearing about how, Gail, it's completely changing your life outside of all the wonderful work you do. And the ripples that everyone's seeing kind of out in the world. So I just think it's all of these things seems like the no-duh next step for what this movement needs to be. And I'm just so excited to watch it.
Yay. Well, thank you for being here. And
yeah, thank you guys for having me.
It's deeply meaningful.
So, I don't know if people saw, I scrunched a little bit when you were talking, Hildy. And well, there's, I think this is a space where I'm in that I'm still navigating, which is the conversation about creating the future versus the outcomes that creating the future is about. So when you talked about that center ripple and you talked about people who are creating the future, they want to be a part of it. They want to integrate it in their life. Just the question that came into my head is that creating the future, that entity that embodies right now the education, the demonstration, the development of the ideas, versus that which creating the future stands for. And it's a tension that I know I feel, which is I want and I value catalytic thinking and the other ideas that run parallel with it in the world, that really do these incredible things for people. And I want that to be part of my life. And not that I don't want to support creating the future as an entity either. I mean, I'm here and I'm doing this and I do want to be a part of that. But there are two different pieces there, which is one is kind of the thing of creating the future and what it is about and its stuff. And then there is the thing that creating the future makes possible as one player in the world that's there. And so I'm thinking about that inner ripple of, are there two, to go to what Alex said, which is, doesn't have to be one or the other, it could be either. But is there something mutually in that? Am I just stepping up a level? I don't want to abandon the idea of structure and creating the future as an entity, but I also want to be clear, again, this is the tension of movement versus organization.
Yeah, and it's the place that's the line that we're exploring. I'm totally, the thing that has been driving this from an operational and a board discussion over the past year has been, this is a laboratory that is doing work to support a movement. So this is, there's, if you think back, everybody likes to touch back to the civil rights movement. There were lots of training organizations that trained people in nonviolent action. There were lots of support to the movement, things that were going on. And creating the future is a support entity for a movement to create a more humane world. And the support that we provide is to experiment with things that bring out the best in people, so that people who are on the front lines of those active movements creating a healthier world, have these approaches, these practices, but not just them. As Sydney's saying, any individual anywhere has those to do with their lives, as Gail is doing, bringing out the best in herself and those around her in just a day-to-day way. But our job is, there's work to be done to support that. And so I guess when I've been thinking structure, and this is just me, when I've been thinking structure, I've been thinking, what structure will most effectively support the work to support that movement?
So can I come in here, please? I've been listening to the conversation, and I've also been watching Twitter, and Kent Shell on Twitter, I think, made an important intervention about the open source movement and what can we learn from the open source movement. So bear with me here, but I'm just trying to think about how you feel about the tight and loose issue, about how you feel about how sorry, I can't think of a better word, but how precious you feel about the ideas and about the methods that you're proposing. Because if you feel that what you're teaching or what we're teaching is the right way, then this sort of notion of ripples is really important, and structure is important at the center, because ideally what you sort of want at the center is, this is the way that we run the ship, and we're going to try and find a way of using the network to sort of take that out. So that's almost like sort of the Wikipedia. type approach, and you might have a structure like the Wikimedia Foundation where it's quite tight at the center in terms of editorial controls, but it's quite loose in terms of what people then put onto the Wikipedia platform. But you might alternatively think that that we really don't know what the answers are. We're just trying to add to the gene pool. We're trying to add to those bacteria in Justin's Petri dish about what's there. And if that's the case, I think the notion of ripples is actually completely wrong, because ripples suggest to me that that you've got something that is the answer in the center and it's just rippling out, whereas what we instead might be thinking is that we want something very loose in the center. We're seeding ideas at the center, and we're hoping that they will go out into the ether, into the Petri dish, and they will mutate into different ideas. And in that sense, that's almost a bit like that's a bit like Android, which I think pretty much came from Linux, and Android has forked into lots of different versions at the moment, and the notion of something central and controlled is becoming much less important. And if that's the sort of thing that we want, then the structure at the center is much less formal. It's just that's more like Linux, with the guy that did the Linux kernel originally, and he's just a body, and he doesn't really control anything anymore. But the whole thing has mutated and taken over the world.
But so the Android case is, I think, really interesting because, sorry, that was me. What Google is doing is the way that they're pushing forward their vision is they create their version of it. So they do the Nexus phones, which is their pure Android. And so they allow people to do kind of whatever it is within that open source framework, but then they can set the vision by saying, look, this is sort of our vision for what is possible. So I think it's actually quite inspiring to think about that. Maybe that's a bit of the structure we provide. And again, it's not a stick, but a carrot. So sort of showing, hey, this is kind of the ideal you could move towards. You don't have to, but hey, this is what it could be. So kind of setting that vision. So it's actually an interesting analogy.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad, Carl, that you mentioned the idea about being precious, because about, 20 minutes ago, I wrote myself a note that said, what I'm hearing is how important it is to avoid making this so precious that it becomes static. That this isn't an organization to be sustained, that it's a set of values and perhaps practice, hopefully practice, but only because we've seen so many examples of how it works. And we have the tendency, though, because it's what we've always seen, to try to recreate that somehow. And I really find what you just said quite it resonates for me, that moving it out of the realm of structure actually gives it a chance to have life. If it stays in this heavily controlled, highly structured thing, it will not move forward.
But I think we need some structure, right? So I'm thinking, especially as I'm taking the beta class, I've sort of internalized these values to some degree, but I don't always know how to practice them. And having the class has enabled me to have that chance to practice those things, to be able to turn the values into ways that I can communicate with people. And so I guess, there's got to be a little bit of, here's how you do it, or here's how we know it's work in these situations. It doesn't have to be one way that it happens necessarily, but there's got to be some kind of structure for people to come in and be able to then apply it.
So then structure is actually about the space for practice.
Yeah, and some tools.
Mm-hmm. Practice and stories and tools.
Yeah.
So hence you come back to the Wikipedia platform, which provides a structure in terms of the place where you can write down your thoughts. It has some rules, or maybe rules is the wrong word, but it codifies the values in a way so that roughly speaking, if you're right. You get some feedback on whether or not what you're doing is working, which I think, as Angie has just said, is really important. And there's a body of people at the centre who are the sort of the ultimate sort of guardians of what's going on, because as Justin also pointed out before, not everyone might want to take these things in a direction that is for the good, for the public good.
I think we're coming back to, therefore, the question of what, and we can use the word structure, we can use the word shape, whatever this thing is, what it makes possible is providing a space to learn, to practice, to come together with others, to explore, to share stories. It feels like it is a space of some kind. That's sort of maybe the structure holds the space for these kinds of activities to happen. Maybe that's a part of its potential is rather than structures that try to control those spaces, that what it makes possible is a sense of holding the space for those activities to happen.
There was a couple of comments that were made that made me look at the metaphors that we're talking about in those. Carl, you were referencing Linus Torvalds and Linux, and the fact that he basically came up with something and it's free to the world and has led to basically a revolution in terms of that technology. Yet there are still standards within that. You know, I can't plug my USB device into a computer that is running Linux unless there are certain standards that that's meeting. And in this particular metaphorical case, I think of that as the values that has, not has to, but that's part of what creates the consistency of it. Because if we're talking just about ideas and, you know, it can morph into something else and morph into something else, it's something completely different. So unless there is some set of standards that people can adhere to, they don't have to. And the same thing with Linux, they don't have to. And the same thing with Google's Android. You know, here's a shining example of what it should be, i.e. the Google phones or the Google, you know, in-house system. But, you know, I can be Amazon and I can do my own version of it that totally changes everything. That's fine. But it means that I participate at the level that I want to participate. So I think having standards is really, really important. And it talks about, Stacy was talking about on Twitter, the living lab basically can be mined for what works. So there is also a repository component here of, you know, what are we doing and what can other people learn from it?
Right. Is that Laura?
Yeah.
Walking River One, I think that's Laura. I don't have my glasses, I can't see it in the picture. But Walking River One says, one role of structure is to hold institutional memory so that lessons learned are not forgotten. And that whole piece about our ability to share and learn from each other's stories. Stacy talking about what would it take for people using the questions to report results to the living lab. So again, there's that whole sharing of stories piece. Then the collective living lab can be mined for more of what works, helping the movement stay alive.
I want to make the case, though. I respond. I hear that. I hear those points. And I guess I just want to say that I've experienced situations where it's in the absence of heavy structure, heavy rules that the innovation and creativity that people are absolutely craving, and we've talked about several times this morning. That's where the seeds can be planted and they can be realized. Yes, institutional, all of those things are they tend to lead us towards the words that we say to each other, which are, well, this is the way we've done it in the past, or this is the way we've always done it. And that kind of conversation doesn't lead me, I think, to that leads us to the place called precious, where then it becomes this thing that has to be sustained because it's the thing, rather than the experience that people are bringing to it, the learning that they're receiving. And we know for sure, because there are lots of examples of it, that practice, tools, feedback, and stories of impact are actually the place that the world changes. Has nothing, it's, as you would say, Hildy, in teaching, it's always about the people and never about the thing.
So I think part of what's happening is everybody having a different image of the word structure. Because what you said, Gail, is that the good stuff happens in the absence of heavy structure and heavy rules. Structure is just a thing. I mean, it could be an ethereal structure. So I was struck by, in the absence of heavy structure and heavy rules, makes an assumption that we're talking about heavy structure and heavy rules. That when I envision a structure, I envision something that when I have been picturing this over the past several months, I don't have a specific image in mind, but what I have is loose connections of networks, interwoven networks, having spaces to bring those connections together, and that it's not heavy structure. It's just the opposite of that. That it is distributed power. That it is distributed decision making. That it is collective power and decision making among whomever cares about the thing and whatever the thing is. So if the thing is a class, if the thing is a project, that somebody says, wow, this, I mean, we have, one thing that we have as an asset is we have this, this organizational tax exempt thing that is an asset, that if Carl found a really cool project that he thought would further the mission, and could say, wow, we could partner and we could, there's all this educational stuff that we've got, or there's all of this knowledge that we've got, or this whole network that we've got, that everybody's got the ability to somehow, that we define in some way what are the ties, what is the space, what are the connections. In my mind, the words that keep coming up are relationship, connection, space. When I've been thinking about structure, is what are the connection, what are the connective tissue, as Deborah Jacobs and Patterson like to talk about. What is the connective tissue that builds those relationships that allow that stuff to happen? Because as an entity over the past several years, we've got stuff. And so I want to just be really clear about the fact that structure can be loose or heavy. And what I just keep focusing on is what it can make possible for anybody that wants to take an active role of bringing out the best in other people. And I think that, coming back to Justin's word about actors, that whatever this structure is that we define can make possible is giving people that self-efficacy that Justin talked about. That people are, and I'm hearkening back to the conversation I had with Chloe Waratini last week from Inspiral, where she talked about Inspiral as a loosely structured, and it's got actually some pretty concrete structures, entity that allows people to do meaningful work. So if part of what this structure makes possible for people who want to be actors and bring this stuff, these frameworks out into the world, these ways of being, if what it does, if the structure gives them that, empowers them to do so, rather than what structures tend to do, what heavy structure and heavy rules tend to do, is take away the power. I've got the power, and I'll decide if you get to do the project you want to do. And I'm seeing that whatever we decide could make possible is just the opposite of that. It could empower people to understand what they can get from being part of whatever this loose thing is. And I'll stop talking now, but I'm just seeing something really different than what we're talking about here.
One of the thoughts that goes through my mind is thinking about language and thinking about the structure of language in terms of being able to write a book or write a story or write, whatever. There are still rules, and those rules are designed for understanding. So in order for you to understand what my sentence means, you need to have an understanding of those words, and we need to have a shared understanding of those words. So I am having a conversation with you right now because we have a set of understandings and rules around the use of language. I can say anything I want. I can create a story that is absolutely amazing, still, and totally unthought of before. A completely new thing is what I can be thinking, and I can say it in a story. I can write it down using language, but I still, in order to communicate it, need to have a way to do that. That's part of how I see this structure, is a way of a baseline to be able to communicate. Now, that prohibits mind meld, because, it not prohibits, but it doesn't take into account something that is totally outside the realm of a way of communicating. But if we're using this method of communicating, then we need to use language, and the language we're using needs to be at least some level of mutual understanding of the words and sentence structure and whatever. And if I was to apply metaphor to this, that's the metaphor that I'm applying. And Gail, I'm kind of responding to you right now in your comment, in that, yes, I don't want this to be constricted. But on the other hand, if it's so free form, then can we really communicate with each other? We can go out and do our own thing, but how do we do this in a way that, if we really believe that we want to bring out the best in everybody, how do we share that with people? And I think it's the language that we're talking about for being able to do it.
And so the analogy there then, I think, is that it's about the language. It's not about the form that the story takes. So it's maybe storytelling, but then it can be a book, it could be a podcast, it can be a movie.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, and a couple of things. I'm loving Doug. Thank you. Doug said the lab metaphor suggests a space with rules that you log in, that you book the room. But actors have freedom and flexibility to work when applicable and can invite others in. And what I'm realizing in playing with that is that we've always sort of shorthanded and said that creating the future is a living laboratory. And what the reality is that the lab space is it is a metaphor, but it is a part of the work. It is the R&D mandate to explore, but that we also have and that people are exploring on their own. So it's not, here's creating the future, doing the research, but no, everybody's sort of out there, and everybody's looking for the stuff that they find, and we've always said that there's this cool thing about the quote unquote membrane around the organization, because organizations suggest there is a membrane around it, that it is a container, that it be porous, that there not really be one, and that people are seeding the wisdom. But I'm thinking about the education function, that in some cases we have classes teaching stuff. In some cases, Justin, you're out teaching it right now, going to New Orleans to teach it. And so again, I'm just, yeah.
So we've said that we look at traditional organizations and the things that we don't like, that we're trying to find a solution to. First of all, this thing where they're hermetically sealed, they've got a membrane around them, and they're not very accountable to wider publics. They're not very good at innovation because they're not open. So we talked about that. But one of the advantages of organizations and traditional structures is about direction. And I think where possibly Gail may be coming at, and where I might add a bit, is, okay, well, even if we're just that space or that laboratory for ideas, who's setting direction? Because even laboratories have directors.
Yeah, and interesting. Laura says it alarms her that whatever the board group might be might not exist to support me in doing this work.
So, okay, did I just forget my thought?
It'll be back.
Yeah, I have to form it. Sorry.
It's okay. So we're talking about language. We're talking about container. We're talking about space. We're talking about connective tissue. We're talking about relationships. Doug says the board then could be the peer review of the lab's experiment findings. Like science, innovation is reviewed, published, countered.
Hey, the labs at my university, there's a teacher or somebody who's mentoring. That's an important part of this.
Yeah.
So, and that's also a really interesting point as well, actually. So, Hildy, I'm going to challenge you here. I wonder if we're obsessing a bit too much about structure and what it looks like, and instead what we should be thinking about is just what is it that we'll be doing. So let's assume, for example, that us as a group, whether you call us trustees or directors or not, let's assume that we met once a month. The issue should instead be, what are the things that we do that would be useful to this community? How do we help them?
I think there's an assumption there that we would have a board, and I think that's jumping to an assumption that here's a structure. Let's assume we have it, and I would really prefer for a while that we play in the land of let's not assume we have any specific structure, and try to make it useful. Let's play first with whatever it is that could be useful, and then decide what that would look like. I'm nervous about assuming we have any particular structure and trying to make that work, because that's really tool based and it makes me nervous.
And that's a fair comment. I suppose where, again, I'm just trying to challenge you a bit is, I mean, I can do and say whatever I want because I'm 7,000 miles away, and you know what I mean? I don't turn up sometimes for meetings, and other times I do turn up, or I see a bit of Mark Riffy's head or something like that for a bit. And I suppose what I'm trying to say is that whether you think we have a structure or not, I can pitch up once a month or however often, and I can do things that you guys hopefully will think are useful. And
what I want to, if you want to use the word challenge, what I want to throw back is that all of those things don't require that there be a board. So I want us to be really mindful of the fact that if that we get stuck in language and we get stuck in structures. And I think Justin finally got his thoughts.
Well, I think what it comes down to is what's the structure holding up, and I think that's the tension. So I think that there are, and so I think of movement, I think of collaborative, and I think of, even the idea that was sort of thrown of peer review. I think one of the things that's been powerful is we can take these ideas that we've taken ideas that we've stumbled upon because of trying to be an organization that have been very provocative and thoughtful and basically peer reviewed by us as an entity. However, what's unclear is, are we, and I know this is a question, but are we supporting creating the future as the entity that is the vessel that holds these training and development and a lot of what Dimitri and Hildy do, and then volunteers come in to help deliver? And there needs to be a container for that thing. I mean, there is an action, there's an activity. That needs to be held in something. I have an LLC that holds it's the container for my work that has other reasons for it. But So I think the tension here is, are we a place for the petri dish of fostering ideas and approaches and exploring and supporting how people can do this kind of work, versus a structure that's supporting a specific type of work that has come out of the offices in Tucson as a collaborative effort? And I think that's some of the tension that I'm hearing here, is that if there needs to be an organizing principle about some of those deliverables that are there, that's one thing, and that can be organized however we would want it to be. But the question is, what am I responsible to when I come into this space? Am I responsible to the viral spreading of the ideas and creating space and thinking about how people get engaged and do this? Or am I responsible for supporting the proliferation of a deliverable that has been structured, the training, the lab, the piece? And I think, again, that's some of sort of the tension that I'm feeling, is when and this is some of the construct of, when I think of the movement, I think of the collaborative, where we are all coming in, supporting one another in what we're doing. We're figuring out how we work to Gail. What's the strategy that Gail needs? What's the strategy that Hildy needs? What's the, where we sort of all bring different things, and we become the melting pot of that. That's a petri dish. So keep that analogy there. Versus, I come in, and this is the traditional role. I slightly divorce myself from me, and I focus all of my energy on this other thing that I feel an obligation to support somehow, and I don't know how to support. And I don't know if I'm responsible for ensuring the financial viability of that. And that's a very thing that I don't know. I'll say it. I don't know if anyone else will say it, but I have this great concern of, if I'm a board member, and I know we're trying to move away from that, but I think it's a good explanation. What am I doing to make sure that you are viable, Hildy, as a business, as creating the future as a business? Is that a question I should be asking, or should I be saying, Hildy, I'm confident you're going to take care of yourself, but I want to be able to support you in that. I want to explore the ideas that are coming out of that. But so too with Alex, so too with Carl, so too with Gail.
And I think we're defaulting back to the conversation about, I want to be a board member who's supporting this organization and making sure that it's viable and making sure that Hildy's okay. That's
not what I heard.
In part, it is, how do we make, the question of how do we make sure that this is economically viable and sustainable is, in my mind, a question of I want to flip the question again, and I want to play with the question of what a structure can make possible, and what would it take to be that. One of the things that it would take is, to use the terminology, a business model that creates that viability. So rather than the traditional question of what is my role in ensuring that there are resources there, if there were no board, if from the get-go we said, we only need one board member, okay? Who wants to be the board member? Alex, you'll be the board member.
Hildy, actually, I heard Justin say that was the old way of thinking, and that what's on the table now is the exploration of something different and new, which in other places and other times we would have called what everyone's been describing: collaborative, mutual support, peer review, etc., a community of practice. And I really do feel that this creature has been evolving from what was once upon a time described as needing to be a nonprofit organization, with very specific for that moment reasons why it was created that way, to now something that we would probably describe as a community of practice, where people come together to do all of the things that, thank God this is being recorded, because whoever takes notes is going to pick out all the pieces of what we've described as its function and its functionality. But really what we're saying is, we're not going to worry about that the model business, all that stuff. We're saying, how will we all come together to support one another? What would it take for that to happen on a consistent basis, with all of the moving parts assured on a regular basis? And thank you, Justin, for your description of the difference between what am I prepared, the commitment I'm prepared to make sure that this community of practice thrives, versus the old way, which was that central organizational hub that had to be propped up in order to keep it going. Hildy and Dimitri have taken, you guys have taken some significant steps in the last 4 months in order to remove the hub that needs to be supported. And now we're kind of releasing ourselves into a new realm, which is called, we're all going to be self-sustaining. What does it take for us to support each other to self-sustain as we expand and express and share the excitement of this incredible thing we've tripped over that we want everybody to know about?
Thank you for the clarification, and I apologize for not hearing it the way you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
No worries.
Want to add for a second that Trey has been texting me comments, and I don't know if if she can't get into Twitter or whatnot. So,
okay, hi Trey.
So I wanted to honor Trey for that, and I wanted to just quickly relay what she's been texting. As she texted that much is to be learned from improv. And the way improv is taught is experiential through games that allow practice of flexible and adaptable ways of being. So thank you, Trey.
Yes, very much so. Get on Twitter. I also wanted to take a look at some of the other comments. Rebecca had said that structure holds welcoming and supportive space. Each person determines meaningful ways to spend their time. I think that's one of the things that it can make possible is holding welcoming and supportive space, with each person determining, I really like that. Stacy noted that being aware of the results is key to the techniques even after the R&D, and that the role of a movement is to keep morale high when things are hard. That leaders are both one of us and inspire us in movements. That's huge, and that's super needed. Transparent processes mean that the us can see the leaders are not superhuman, that we all can be leaders, but people are willing to do visible leadership. That people willing to do visible leadership is so crucial. And then Doug talked about the fact that in jazz, members are performers, can create on their own, but they love to structure up, play together, create music. And organization is the key we're in, which is another interesting metaphor. But I'm seeing us keep talking about it. For me, in my mind, everything we're talking about comes back to the relationships, that connective tissue. Some of the questions of who gets to do what and what does it take to ensure that that happens. In what space, who is supporting whom, what structure holds up activities to support each other, what space, and that all of these are things that a structure, whatever shape we choose, makes possible, is to hold up. I loved when you said, Justin, what is this thing holding up? There are activities that are happening. And those activities are the pieces that we have started years ago, that others have started, that others have jumped in on, and that others are starting to take a lead on, as in suggesting, saying, this is where I want to play. And playing there, and that feels really distributed and really powerful. Where's the support for those people who are taking on something and saying, I really want to play with this, And I want a team around me. And Gail, you talked about community practice. I want people around me. Angie, you talked about the ability to have the people to practice what you're learning. What can support that? What space holds that? What are the relationships?
So
Because
Laura
it's about people.
What Laura was talking about.
Who's going to support me?
Right.
Yeah.
That's her concern.
And another feature of it and it's been mentioned a few times, is encountering in that space, encountering power and voice. And part of the evidence that this is actually a space where the relationships are balanced is one where we hear more about us than me. It's more about what we're all doing together rather than what I'm doing, or how are we supporting each other versus how is any one individual,
or how it fits.
Yep.
How any individual fits into the whole.
Yep.
I also, we understand through metaphors. I understand through metaphors, and one of the metaphors that keeps coming to my mind is library. That a library doesn't tell you what to think. It doesn't tell you what but there are certain structures that exist so that you know where to find the information. You know where it is. And you can add to it. If you write a book, or I don't want to overextend the metaphor, but the idea that there is a repository that is open to people that they can go to, and I think of the Stories Initiative and how that blends into this, and just the history of how this has progressed. So that's another way that I've been thinking about this is that I've been thinking about structure is in the context of something like that.
I have another question I'd like to play with. And it relates directly to, because what we've been talking a lot about is operationally, how people relate and around activities. And I'm at a point where I don't even have a question, but it's around leadership. What has been happening over the past year or so is that anybody who wants to be really actively involved in this work in some way, in this mission to make it ubiquitous that there are questions we can ask that can bring out the best in each other. People have been stepping in and saying, I really want to have this be who I am and what I do. I want this to be a big part of my life. And here's where I'm really interested in playing. And they've been taking the leadership, taking the baton and running with that. And what started out as an operations team, which was just from a strictly logistical, how do we get all the stuff done that needs to be done? Gail and Nancy coming together and saying, we're doing a lot that has to do with teaching, and we really need to all be talking to each other. Is really taking the role of a leadership team, of having the ongoing conversation about what are the activities that are happening, what will ensure that they happen in ways that create what is possible, structured around our values. And so I'm sort of playing with, and anybody that steps into a space of, I want to do this really cool thing and I want to lead this activity, if the door is open, okay, now you're part of the group. I'm sort of playing in my mind with the question, and then like I said, I can't even form a question of what is leadership. What are we even leading, I guess, and what are the structures when you have various activities, and the need, as you guys talked about, as we talked about in June, to ensure that activities are deeply embedded with the values, are deeply embedded with connecting and engaging, and fit within a strategy that will accomplish the mission. What is a structure, what does that make possible in terms of the leadership? Because I think that there is a piece of, as Laura said, I want to know somebody's there. And I want to know somebody's making decisions about stuff that is meaningful to me.
Can I ask a tangentially related question? Maybe this clarifies things, maybe not. But how do we know when the structure is? So in other words, is it something that we're always building? Or if there is some aspect, like let's talk about the jazz analogy, where the job is to set, I don't know, the tempo and to set the chord. And once you've done that, then I was actually at a jazz show where the conductor basically just walked away. He sat down because the people were soloing. He had kind of done his job. How do we know when we've actually set the structure? Because if we do want things to go beyond where people can individually be leaders, then eventually you can't constantly be building the structure. I mean, you set the structure, you've set the chord structure. How about it?
It's the language. It's the, all of the,
So
Well, I think there's a difference between, I'll be very brief, Justin. I think there's a difference, though, between, the question I heard was, what would it take for leadership to thrive in these relationships, community, whatever you call, whatever the structure ends up being called. And it seems to me that we talk a lot about, and especially in our classes, the kind of right-sizing the activity for the community according to what people can contribute and give, the gifts they have, the talents, etc., rather than setting an expectation that people may or may not be able to achieve.
Can you talk more about setting an expectation people might not be able to achieve?
Well, I guess that it's the it's a way of organizing that's about receiving and accepting the gifts that are given when they can be given. It's kind of going back to what Carl said earlier about people with very little time being able to give what they can when they can, and that the organization structure, whatever it's called, then operates on the basis of that and calls that success, rather than the centralized command structure of this is what has to be done and we need people to get it done, and then judging ourselves based on the degree to which we were getting those initiatives done. It's not very well formed thought, but I do see a difference there.
Okay. Justin?
So when you talked about ensuring the values, so I'm going back to kind of thinking about our work, thinking about this idea of the laboratory, the stewards, and what we are stewards of. And one of the things that has been interesting, and I just look back at sort of our conversations, and because we don't review the actions of creating the future. We're not vetting your online trainings against the values. We're assuming that the work has been done and that those are advancing things. We don't look at, we didn't vet Candace. We helped think about the questions and what you would want. And so what I see is actually, we don't review the stuff. We don't review the actions. We don't ask the questions about, is that the right way to be doing it? What we ask, when we think about the values and ensuring the values are in things, we actually go to micro-transactional things, like what would bylaws look like? What would practices look like? Which I think is really interesting. I mean, it's applying the thinking to say, there are structures, there are things that we do. What would it look like to do it different? So that's one place where we are peer reviewing, not creating the future. We are peer reviewing conceptual ideas in society and pushing them and pushing against them and thinking about how they would be different. So there's that piece that's going on, which I think is just a, boundary pushing, questioning, applying the framework to everyday stuff. Okay. And I think that's part of the community of practice that Gail was talking about. And that's an intellectual exercise, which I think is very stimulating. And I think there are a lot of people, and we've had guests who are very interested in that space. So I think about a structure that creates that as a thing. I think about another space where what you've experienced as the operational team sort of gets expanded, which is I'm thinking about ways to advance something through either education or the way I do something. And you sort of put that onto the table of who are the people who are interested in actually thinking about how to operationalize an idea and what that would look like. And that's what your operations team has done. And I know there's deep value in that. But then there's also the bigger space of where do I come to find people who have similar passions to me, who are equally committed to seeing the world change with a similar perspective, who are willing to actually step into a space and put themselves out to lead something. So whether that is what you've talked about with Rebecca and what she's doing, or what Lisa has done, or what Gail has done, or the compelling thing that keeps coming back into my head, which is I want to create movement among the fellows, that we're more engaged in stuff. That's the role that I take. That's sort of my commitment, is whatever this group is I step into this group to willingly take a leadership role in advancing something of the collective that's here. And that's very action oriented, but it's a collective responsibility. Those other elements that are more of the laboratory experimental pieces, I think it's just, how do we co-create those spaces that we all come in, and what's there. So that's actually when I'm thinking about that values piece. I don't think we've actually traditionally done anything on the creating the value creating the future as an organization, really vetting the organization itself. And I know we're not focusing on that, but if that's not what our role is, our role should be about advancing ideas and taking leadership roles and coming together as a group to figure out how we lead, both this group and other groups, how we lead those ripples.
I was reframing what you were talking about, Justin, in terms of the question of what a structure can make possible. And I'm with you, Gail. I'm so glad this is being recorded, because none of us could take notes fast enough to capture all of this. It's some of what I heard you saying, Justin, was that a structure can make possible co-creating spaces for intellectual exploration. It can make possible an invitation for people to explore their own personal journeys. It can make possible finding others who are on that journey, who want to come together and explore and learn more and go deeper. It can make possible avenues for operationalizing ideas for furthering the mission. And so I'm reframing a lot of what we've been talking about here in terms of what success could look like if a structure were accomplishing everything it possibly could. I think that we could actually, and I want to get to Twitter because these guys are on fire and saying really cool things, but I'm really getting excited about everything that we've been talking about in terms of reframing it under what it could accomplish.
I'm just wondering if you want to have some reflections from Gail and Alex, because they're leaving in like.
When are you guys leaving? 5 minutes. Okay. I want to make sure Gail
I wrote mine, so I'm going to just put them into the chat.
Will you say it, please?
Sure. Absolutely. Let me just get there. What I said was that the thing that's really stuck out for me today was the space, the idea that this structure is actually a place to practice. It's evolving into a place to practice and together to learn from one another and to support one another. That if this board becomes a gathering space where people are sharing their stuff, so much the better. And that's really what stuck out for me, and not just all of us, but everyone who, I mean, just the idea, imagine the possibility of everybody who's talking on Twitter right now, all the people who are watching this via Facebook or through the blog post, the blog or wherever, all coming into a space that we think Zoom can accommodate, and having this discussion together, or any discussion together, just, it sets me on fire. So I can't wait to get into that room. Thank you to everybody who's put the time and effort and thought and care into this.
And thank you, Gail. Thank you a ton. Alex, what is standing out for you in conversation, and thoughts about whatever? Just go.
I'm trying to decide my favorite analogy today. Is it a jazz musician, Linux, library, USB sticks, Petri dish? Any others that I'm missing? There's a lot of language. There's a lot of really good ones.
Aliens. Don't forget about the search for aliens.
Wikipedia.
But I mean, it's so much good thinking. I think what I come back to is like knowing when we'll have succeeded. I think so much of it is about a structure that empowers so many other people. So like, I would be so excited when it's not us that are convening one of these meetings, but someone that's maybe in the Twitter chat that goes, "Hey guys, let's get together. I want to talk about this." So I think a lot of it has to do with holding the space. I think a lot has to do with that language, maybe setting some of the values or the norms. But I think so much of it is getting out of the way. I'm also thinking a lot about, with all due respect, Dimitri and Hildy, I hope at some point you guys aren't needed. And so what does that look like? When do we know when we get there? So great entrepreneurs, great social entrepreneurs make themselves unneeded. So I'm excited about that point and how we place a structure that scales enough so that we reach that point.
Yes. Thank you.
And thank you to all of you. Truly, you guys are, if there's one structure, it's gathering so many amazing minds together. And that's something that I'm so grateful for. So thank you to the conveners and to all of you guys for joining.
Well, we're grateful to you, Alex and Gail, for being part of this overall, being part of this today. I'm honored to be in your presence. So thank you.
Did anybody notice that behind Alex there's something that says "Reach for Change"? It's all this other Swedish stuff you couldn't read, but there's one piece there of "Reach for Change." And you know, Alex, when you talk about people not being needed, I always think about, you know, everyone's essential, but no one's required. And sort of that idea of, you know, that the value comes from all the wonderful ideas that everyone brings to this, and how do we honor that and balance that? I think is a lot of what I hear and what you're saying is that it's not sitting on the shoulders of a few people, but it is, you know, the essential foundation that many people bring. Because we do know there are people just in this space right here that think differently about this stuff. And, you know, if there were greater opportunities for all of that thinking to come together, just wow. And I think to, you know, what Carl tweeted earlier, which is what happens when ideas are no longer owned. Right. What happens when, you know, and it's very difficult to let go of ownership of stuff, but what happens when we really put it out there and we do let it go viral and just let it loose and know that it's got to, you know, it's going to come back to roost in various different ways, and it's going to come back for replenishment in various different ways.
I can't wait to see what happens now that Happy Birthday is no longer it's now an open public domain song. You no longer have to pay to sing it on.
Well, and just so it gets to that image that I keep having, that we'll know that we have been successful when people who've never heard of us are talking to other people who've never heard of us. Bye, Alex. Are being in this way with other people who have never heard of us. Mm-hmm. And that's you know, that's when it's brilliant. I'm looking at what Annette was saying earlier, that she likes the idea of creating the future being a network for supporting and building those who work to actualize shared values. a network for supporting and building those who work to actualize shared values. I'm feeling like we're at a place of, I don't know, a place of reflection and pulling together what we've talked about here.
Can I just briefly reflect on something Gail said just before she went?
Yeah.
Gail said the thing that struck her most about the conversation was that this was about the space. And then that just made me think. There's a guy called Mike Edwards. I don't know if you've come across him, Hildy. Angie might know him. Wrote a book called Civil Society. Michael W. Edwards. He used to be at the Ford Foundation. And he had a sort of a three-part definition to civil society. He said it's the space where people come together to discuss what a good society looks like. It's the idea, it's the normative sort of sense of what a good society should look like. So it's those values and things that we're discussing. And then he said, and it's associational life. It's all those organizations that occupy the space. And I sort of thought that translates really well to what we've been talking about today. We're the space, we're that vision, we're that normative idea of what a good society should look like. And instead of the associations, we're a bunch of individuals who come together and live in that space to discuss what that good society looks like. And then that made me think a bit that, okay, well, what's the structure that governs civil society? Well, there isn't one. And there shouldn't be one, because the moment you try to start to govern it and control it, you start to lose what you value about it so much. It's that free flow of ideas. So instead, what you have to rely upon is that there are leaders, there are people who will come together and they will regularly discuss and debate what that good society should look like. And that, to me, sounds like what your board is. And again, I think if I was just going to be cheeky and sort of challenge you a bit, I sort of think, are we really helping you by coming together once a month and discussing the accounts and whether or not you filed your 990 and stuff like that? No, actually, we're most useful to you when we come and sit together and we discuss and debate these ideas.
And what I am eager for, Carl, is less are we useful to you, and how are we useful to each other? Because the pushback you always get from me is it ain't about us. It ain't about what's useful for us.
Yeah.
It really. I'm loving where this conversation has been going today. That it really is how we are empowering each other to do all the things that you guys have been talking about. You know, that goes back to the old model of are you useful to us?
And sorry, can I just say, and that's fine, and I can absolutely go with that, but the price of that is that the people that we are useful to, they also then have to sort of engage and step up and tell us what they need. I think we can provide leadership and direction, and we can be useful to them, but it is much more incumbent upon leaders need followers, don't they? And it's much more.
I guess what I'm hearing more is that this is less about we are a board and who are we useful to, and more about a structure that is way more collaborative in terms of who is talking at the table and about what, and what that table is, and if there's a table or if there's many tables, and if there are series of tables where people are coming together around the things that matter the most to them with some sort of organizing shape, structure, connective tissue between all of those things that are being co-led by function rather than led by something at the center. And so I'm really seeing
in the
much
movement,
more.
there is communication between parts of the movement. I mean, whatever form that takes. I mean, it could be a letter.
And they're
it
but
could
the
be an
cells
individual. Right. But there needs to be, in order for it to scale, I believe that there needs to be a way of communicating. That might be what the structure is, but there needs to be a way of bringing together. If part of what we're doing is supporting each other, who are the other, that we're supporting, and who are the other who could support us? So I think it's very important that there be some, framework of communication
between function and stuff that's happening.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm
So one of the semantics triggers went off in my head when you were talking, Dimitri. Scale makes me important. Scale was kind of making me not agitated, but I was uncomfortable because that's scaling a thing. And I think about spreading. What we really want is to spread. We don't necessarily want any thing to be bigger other than the conceptual idea. It's not that we want an organization or a structure of even creating the future to be huge. And I think this was the podcast that you had, or the conversation you had with Inspiral was very interesting, Chloe, about if it scales too much, it stifles. It actually loses. I mean, it's not the starfish. The whole idea of the starfish is not scaling, it's spreading. It's the petri dish. The petri dish never gets any bigger. It just, the things just keep going and spilling out of it and going out into the world and propagating in that way. And so I think that's actually a conceptual idea that's important to hold, is how do we spread it rather than scale it?
or both. What if it is yes and? Because I'm really thinking it is yes and. Because I think in order to spread it, so let's look at the it, okay? And let's look at the fact that Sydney and Angie right now are in classes, and you have been in a class, Justin. Somebody had to teach those classes. For ideas to be propagated, someone needs to collect them, write them, organize them in ways that people can learn them, absorb them, practice them. So there are activities that support the spread, and those.
Well, yeah, I think what I think where you're going, and I think this struck me as well. You're scaling the spark, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're scaling that piece that the part that allows everything else to explode in its own way and evolve in its own way. So you're not saying that this is ultimately the only way it's going to be, but everything needs a starting place. So what structure, and I do like the idea of separating structure from board. We can get back, because I think that conversation is more important than the board piece right now, because you'll come back to it. But that what structure is needed, and what would a structure make possible from the standpoint of it would make possible scaling of that initial spark that creates the conversation that goes to wherever it might go. But I say at the same time, I think it is all simultaneously important, as Justin said, to make sure that it's no more than that you're not talking about scaling, that everything has to look a certain way only on a larger scale, because that's important as well. And just one more quick point that I think, another thing that a structure makes possible is, while that initial spark or the initial rock in the water that creates the ripple, or whatever you want to, the image you want to use, there is this need for, I think the structure makes possible for memory, right? The knowledge management, the memory that is of this evolving being. Because there will come a time when you'll need to recall certain aspects of the movement at certain points in time, and a structure can allow you make that possible for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kent Schell tweeted, perhaps creating the future's ripples and spaces of influence may be conceived as dynamic, ongoing circles of exchange. and any questions how to lead that, or maybe how to lead. I'm not sure.
I keep seeing circles. In everything we're talking about, I keep seeing circles. I keep seeing rings of circles and interlocking circles and circles with connective tissue between them.
I also want to comment on what you just said, Sydney, that I agree really totally that unless there is some way to have an and I'm going to use institutional memory, but to have a memory of what we've done and where we've been, then to me, that's one more component of supporting each other, because we're far flung across the world. And you may be doing something that you need support for. Well, there's all different kinds of support. Some of the support might be simply the data bank of information that helps you move forward.
Or just knowing somebody has done this before,
right,
or whatever
right.
that this is.
Or this succeeded here. I mean, we know that it's not the technique that succeeds, it's really the values and the ideas behind it. So in a new circumstance, it may be a completely different technique that's required to make something effective. But knowing that this worked or didn't work just gives me more tools and more abilities or facets of ways to look at something. So I really advocate that it's important that there be something like that in place as part of this structure.
I'm also loving, Sydney, the question that you came up with, which is what structure will scale the initial spark that allows the ideas to spread. And I think that sort of captures in a both and sense, the sense that you were feeling of a dynamic pull and push, Justin, that it combines them, that it's not an either or.
I have a quick aside. I love the fact that we have a chat box, which is just for the group, but there is a chat going on between the people on the screen on Twitter. So it is.
I know. Everybody's like in multiple places because our heads are exploding and we need to type someplace.
No, I was just bored, so I wanted to do something else.
Yeah, I know. We bore the hell out of you, Carl. You've always said that.
And being the masochist you are, you join us every now and again to be bored.
Wow. Where are you guys feeling like we're at?
For me, this is a very typical board conversation.
For our board.
For our board. Not for any other board I've ever been on ever. It's interesting. It is part theoretical. It is part sort of mind-bending. And it's a little bit practical, but it's probably not enough practical, because I'm not quite sure, after discussing this for in a good couple of hours, I'm not sure we have a roadmap or any sort of design in terms of what next looks like. And again, if I was going to be critical of us, I don't think we're good enough at then rounding up the ideas and saying, okay, now we know what to do, because I'm not sure we do.
Not yet. Part of what the intent was of this conversation was that this be a first conversation, not the last one.
Right. Okay.
That we needed to start the conversation. I think we would be kidding ourselves if we thought that we were going to finish this in 3 hours. But I think that we are talking about months of conversation across many platforms with many individuals who are deeply engaged and caring about this in a lot of different ways. But as far as the practical, it may not. There may not be a practical answer right now, Carl, as to, now we know what to do. But the result of this exploration over the next several months may be the most practical thing that we've ever done, is to figure out what is going to support moving forward to accomplish this mission over what remains left in the 10-year time frame we'd given ourselves.
Yeah. Again, just sort of trying to be self-critical and reflective. I think I almost wonder then if the discussion is a microcosm of what the risks might be of the sort of model that we are proposing in terms of awarding, that we have lots of good discussions, but they might not achieve enough given the time that people might typically have available. They need a bit more direction, and that's one of the advantages of structure that someone before on the Twitter feed identified. It gives you a bit of direction sometimes.
Where else are you guys feeling like we're at right now?
So I think I agree with Carl that I think it's a space that's been challenged for us. I don't know how much I'm projecting into how I'm interpreting or how I'm filtering things, but what I'm stepping away with is permission to not worry or feel obligated around creating the future as an organization and its activities. Sort of being released from that and thinking more about being a steward of creating the structure that moves the movement forward. That's where I sort of see, which is, okay, these ideas of being a node, of thinking about the ripples, of the sparks, of that perhaps there is a role evolving of, it's actually these conversations. What does it take for something for an idea to scale or to spread? And we sort of hold ourselves to, are we still asking that question? How's that question playing out? What are some things that people are trying that are out there? What role can we take in helping to think about, I think, going back to that question, which is, what does it mean to lead that? Because that's now very different. It's not how can I lead creating the future or take a leadership role in creating the future. I am standing on the back of creating the future. I won't deny that, but I'm now looking more outward of, hey, we're talking about how to create the neural network that makes this work. And that's our job. I mean, we're overseeing or trying to spur thinking that advances that isn't, I think, back and directed towards creating the future, but actually gets directed towards us collectively. And whether we're the right people for that conversation, I don't know, but that's what strikes me as what's coming out of this. And I think it also means that there are lots of other conversations that are happening out there. And again, I go back to the Inspiral conversation that you had, and even the conversation that you had with Jean Bell about it's now about not managing the thing, but thinking about what the thing could look like and moving forward. And that's a shift. That's a big shift.
Yeah, what are you?
Stacy
Ashton says, yay, you create the structure, we create the future. Nice. Go, Stacy.
And she also said, I think you got a lot further than you think. Once you have what you want to accomplish, the structure will follow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Where else are you guys feeling we're at? Angie, Sydney?
I don't have anything to add at this point. I think it's, I think we're fine. But I do believe that similar to Carl's perspective, what we need to do is make sure that what we were able to get out of today is the starting point for the next conversation, so that there's movement forward, right? That there's because I don't necessarily feel like it has to be several months really to talk about this structure piece. but it does have to be, somewhat focused to move it forward.
We can go. The reason that it took so long is that you guys at the last meeting had said that you wanted to make sure that A, this was the topic of the next meeting, and B, that everyone could be there. And then we went into summer when no one could be there. And so that's the only reason it took this long. We can go back to our normal meeting structure, which was, I think, the second Monday of every month. And so long as there's discussion in between time, and I think a big piece of what's niggling at the back of my neck here is who gets to have the conversations. Is this a, quote, board conversation? Is this when we convene this conversation? Are we having these conversations all month long? And if so, with whom and who's convening them? And what then happens as a board conversation? Those are the very practical questions that are sort of in the back of the mind right now.
I think what comes to mind for me is the notion of do nothing for me without me.
Right.
And if this is a structure that's going to support those that are in that who've already received the first spark, and then those that will come after, I feel like it's structured, but it's a wider conversation. I don't feel like it's a board conversation only.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the people who are on Twitter, for example, they should be able to be on this, format on Zoom, and whomever are in the beta classes or in the past classes or whatever who want to keep, because I think it strikes me that the conversations we're having is also just practicing, again, catalytic thinking over and over, which we all, I think, probably welcome to some degree. So the more people who can participate in that regard, the better. And if we can get a structure like this, like using Zoom, where we can get more than 10 people, that would be good.
Well, what Dimitri has done is busted open. And that is just beyond awesome. The fact that we now can say, okay, on X date, we're going to continue the conversation that we started on November 5th. And whoever wants to be there, come play, and here's the link, up to the 50 people or however many Zoom can accommodate. It's a game changer, Angie. I think you're absolutely right. It's just...
And the fact that they're archived. I think that those two things put together, because it allows people who, life intervenes. I can't be here right now. I mean, we're missing already in this meeting. There are people who wanted to be here and couldn't because of things that happened. Well, this is safe. They can be looking at it, and they can be part of the conversation without having to be brought up to speed in whatever fashion we would attempt to do that.
What do you guys see as next steps then?
I think it feels like we've got a direction of travel. And for me, what sums it up is what Stacey said, that there's a smallish bunch of people that create the structure so that someone else can create the future. That makes lots of sense to me. I'm not particularly hung up on whether we're called board members or so on. If we're just a bunch of people who are committed volunteers who want to make this thing keep going, and then we invite whoever is, we invite a coalition of the willing to join us on an anointed day. It's fantastic by me, especially if Dimitri can set tech so that more than 10 people can take part. I think I keep coming back to this tight and loose thing. You do need some bits of structure to enable people to do things. So you need dates, appointed times, and we need some sort of way of setting direction. So I think the next steps for me is we need to decide when we want to next sit down together and talk, because we've had a period of reflection. I'm guessing if we're all agreed that this is the right way of doing things, there might be some quite practical things that need to be done. I'm guessing in terms of the formal governance of the organisation. But I think the other thing is in terms of next steps is just, acknowledging to each other that actually we're all still interested in this and committed, and we're all there for the journey.
Here.
And is that the case? Do I hear a show of hands? Is that the case?
Yeah, I the word that's bubbling up again is thinking we're catalysts. Who's willing to come together to be a catalyst for this? And that does require structure. It does require intentionality, but it allows us to frame it a little bit differently, which is our role. That is the leadership. Is our role is to steward the scale and spread of the outcomes, not of any single one of us. That's the byproduct, is that we all benefit from it, but that we're really living with, I'm coming here to help move something forward, to help see this thing proliferate out there. And the questions that will come up, it's our job to figure out the space for that to happen. So if it comes up that, gosh, we need a learning lab around, people are doing policies and procedures and stuff like that, then part of what we may be doing is saying, okay, let's seed that. Let's let it get out there. And we know that there's a network of people. And so anybody that's worth, or not worth, but anyone who's interested in catalyzing, and it does require an active role. You have to be willing to step into this space to say, I am willing to do something beyond just showing up for the meeting.
Right.
And talking about it. There are other spaces where we can show up to meetings and talk about really interesting things that are going to blow our mind. We set those up, but this is much more catalytic. That I think also gets at what Carl said, which is there's a goal, there's an outcome, there's a thing that we can walk away with, each of us saying, okay, that's something I'm going to do. Whether it's something I'm going to think about and bring back, or initiative I'm going to take out and try in the world.
Or people you're going to bring back into this,
mm-hmm.
that become involved. Stacy had a couple of questions. Who else cares? Who else wants to figure out the options? And how can we participate? Which addresses the whole thing about that Angie you were talking about in terms of who else is involved in this.
Here's what I'd like to suggest. We go back to our regular board meeting time, Mondays, second Monday of the month, which would take us to December 14th, as a time to aim for. And in between there, we can all be generating conversations and engaging people and bringing them into it. And it won't just be board members. It will be, as you guys have suggested, the people who really want to talk about this, the people who are on Twitter today, that we'll have, instead of 8 slots on this Zoom/Hangout, we may have 15 or 20, but that will commit to our normal 2 hours, second Monday of the month, to at least be a time where we are coming back, bringing together all the information that all of us and each of us have engaged in those conversations in the intervening time, so that we've got a regular schedule of bringing this forward. Does that sound like a plan for you guys?
It does. And my immediate thought is that I'd like Kent Shell, if he's available, to take part, because I think he's got something important to tell us potentially about the open source movement and what we can learn about how those sorts of things are governed. If not Kent, I think we are in contact here with someone who works for the Wikimedia Foundation, and they might be an alternative.
No, not an alternative. A yes,
right, sorry. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
And then the other thing that sort of, again, as I've been sat here thinking, I mean, there are people who understand social movement theory far, far better than me, or understand network theory far, far better than me. And over the coming months, we should be trying to access some of that insight. And quite possibly some people who are experts in the cooperative movement, in governance of cooperatives. Because we have emerged from what you might call a charity and governance model, and some of those alternative ways of thinking might be useful.
Carl, will you invite people you know who fit those molds to join us?
Yes.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. Because I'm looking at the range of people who, A, are passionate about this, care enough to have been with us today, to whom I'm so, so grateful. And B, added so much to the conversation. So Stacy and absolutely Kent, and these people, Angie Eikenberry and Carl Wilding, how the hell? We should have them come into the meeting. Justin Pollock, but Michael Coomer, Laura Steffen, Annette was here today, Doug Knight was here today. We're just so grateful for you guys and want you guys to be here. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to ask for reflections. We're 3 minutes beyond time, but I'm going to ask. I know it may be tough to take a deep breath and say what is standing out for you in our time together today.
Really bloody good to see you.
It's really bloody good to have somebody say bloody good.
I find in just what we were talking about in this idea of inviting people, it's much less scary than this idea of asking someone to be on a board. I think there is so much space to bring ideas in and to allow people to step into leadership in a way that's different and really compelling. That's what.
Yeah. Bye, Carl. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it opens up space now for people to participate in a way that's, I think, aligns with what all we've been talking about.
Yeah, feels right. Sydney?
I mean, it was a great conversation. I think I'm excited about where we're going. And it's absolutely the right decision at this point to bring others in.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, we've been opening the door more and more over the years, and we're just opening the door wider again, which is just awesome. Your reflection?
I feel like a kid in a candy store. I'm just thinking about just some of the people that have been mentioned who could be part of this conversation. And I'm thinking about people, the Inspiral folks, other folks that have been in Next Edge and whatnot who are really not only thinking about this, but want to support other movements, want to be supported and support others. So I'm just, wow, this is like a huge, I don't know, sense of excitement and relief and whatever. So yeah. I'm just, that's what I'm feeling right now.
I am feeling deeply grateful. This stuff has lived in my head for many, 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 many months. It's why frequently throughout the meeting you've probably seen me going like this, because it's really visceral for me, and the opportunity to actually have the conversation. I've been looking forward to this meeting so much. I could. It's been like Christmas. So this is a gift, and it's something that I'm excited about. I'm deeply grateful for everybody that was here on Twitter, and I forgot to name Rebecca in my long list of people. So thank you, Rebecca. But and Kent says this is consistently one of the most interesting discussions he can be involved in. So thank you. I need to share with you that you guys have been able to put some language to things that, like I said, have been swimming in my head. And I'm really grateful for that. Sydney, you talking about what structure, the question of what structure will scale the initial spark that allows the ideas to spread. And then Justin, you talking about being a steward of creating structure that will move the movement forward. To stewarding the scale and spread of the outcomes. Yeah, this is just really exciting, and I'm just deeply, deeply grateful for the conversation and looking forward to the next one. So thank you guys. And we will see everyone in the world next time, or as many people as we can handle in this platform. So, and thank you for making it possible.
Thank you.
Official sign off of it.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, bye.
Bye.